next, we have a panel, Farsighted, Investing in India in the Next Century. As we saw yesterday, India's entrepreneurial ecosystem, or the Indus Valley, is booming. In 2011, there was less than $1 billion in venture capital invested in companies in the Indus Valley. In 2020, that rose to $10 billion, and 2021, it was $40 billion. That was a 4x increase and 3x more than China. There are 108 unicorns, of which 8 are EdTech companies. And to discuss all of this and more, please welcome our next group of panelists. The moderator is Nitin, Bhatia, Managing Director at DCA, Karthik, Reddy, Partner at Blume Ventures, Manasi, Shah, Vice President Accel, Vivian Wu, Managing Partner, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Pratik, Poddar, Partner at Nexus, and Rishab, Kumar, Partner at Cooley. Let's give them a big hand.
So I have an easy job. It's working? Hi, good morning, everyone. I have an easy job. Michael summarized last 5,000 years in 30 minutes. We have 20 years to summarize, so sounds like an easy job. So our discussion for today is India Farsighted. What we are going to focus on is what has happened over the last 10 years in EdTech, and including the COVID years, what has been our experience, and then kind of zoom out and see what's likely to happen in the 10 years and what to look out for in the immediate as signals for the next 10 years. So I'll start by summarizing, some stats for you guys just to kind of understand what has happened in kind of the last 10 years. So 10 years back, we had by 2016, we had 5 unicorns in education globally. Today, we have about 43 unicorns, in education. So that gives you a sense of, the progression that has happened. 2011 to 2016, roughly $12 billion cumulatively had gone into EdTech. In the last 5 years, which is 2016 through to 2022, you have about $67 billion, right? So again, kind of an increase of about 5.5x kind of, going into it. If you look at now the COVID years and kind of what has been the impact on that, so there are some studies that talk about the use of digital instruction materials in classrooms has gone up from 28%, pre-COVID, to about 52% now on a daily basis, right? So on a daily basis, 52% of the instructions are digital in nature today. Again, an indication, and sort of, our friends in Emeritus will relate to it. So pre-COVID, you had about 200 programs, run by different universities on the OPM, program, model. Today, that number is in excess of 350. So, 1.7x increase in the last, call it 2 years odd. So a lot of progress, a lot of capital gone in, a lot of education spends happening. But at the same time, it's not all hunky-dory. So if you will look at sort of especially what has been delivered and where are we today, so we find that if you look at a McKinsey survey, in 2022, it talks about 3 in 4 students reporting, 3 to 4 month gap in their reading or math proficiency, right? So, so during the COVID years. So COVID years actually pulled back the learning, relative to kind of in person, right? So there was something missing, in the EdTech, offering that was there, which led to this kind of learning gap. Also, we did a survey last year, and which pointed to about 67% people saying the doubt-solving solutions that are available in Indian market, for example, didn't really kind of give them joy, right? So there was something missing. So yes, there are offerings out there, but they are not where, let's say, customer expectations are, right? So a lot of progress, great acceleration because of COVID, but still work to be done, I guess is a good summary. So, with that, Vivian, let me start with you. If I were to ask you to kind of, zoom back last 10 years, and not going year by year, as we were talking about it, what have you seen? And, my question is, what have you seen work? What have you seen not work? And what are your sort of thesis on why do some things work better than others?
Yeah, well, I think I won't go year by year. I think if you zoom back 10 years, actually, it might have been my first year at the ASU GSV Summit in Arizona. So, the good news is EdTech has really come a very long way over that period of time. And, I look at it a little bit from the perspective as a global investor. We invest in the US, in India, in Africa, Latin America, and Europe. So, not going year by year, but really kind of looking at some of the arcs. One of the arcs is, really bringing technology into the classroom. You started out, before there was one-on-one devices, really starting to have teacher tools like Edmodo and ClassDojo. You started having instructional content like Newsela, which breaks reading materials into 5 different reading levels. So this was the beginning when you really started trying to teach teachers how to teach in this environment, in this classroom. And a lot of those models, I think what worked was the models that understood you needed to actually help teachers adopt and evolve and be trained, and that you also had to use a lot of implementation supports in order to make sure that these solutions were implemented properly so that you could have efficacy and so that you could have retention. And I think that continues to evolve when you look in India at some of the K-12 companies. When you look at what Lead School is doing, there's a huge emphasis on the teacher. There's a huge emphasis on continuing to support them. So that's a very important arc that's taken place. And I think the models that didn't work as much were models that kind of said, we're going to replace the teacher. Adaptive learning that actually is a robo-tutor that completely ignores the fact that the teacher has contribution in the classroom and skills to provide, supports for the students. I think a second major arc really kind of emerged in 2012, which was the year of the MOOC. And that was really bringing offline learning online. And I think in the first generation of MOOCs, you really were looking at companies that just took what was an offline experience and then transplanting it into the online experience. You had low completion rates. It was just PDFs. It was teachers talking to a screen. And what you see now as you continue to evolve is you're really seeing the potential for actually bringing personalization. You're bringing the best elements of the online experience into the online experience with social media, collaboration, building community, having teachers as mentors on the platform. And so you're really seeing that deepening. And you're also seeing people understand how to use the medium for its benefits, whether that's, when we invested in BYJU'S, a lot of that power of bringing the mobile phone and how that could actually improve interactivity and how it could allow for increasing access. But also that personalized learning journey for students that's really enabled by that interactive experience and that engaging experience. So that's also another arc that we've been really excited to see. And even today, we saw that in the fireside chat with Akash yesterday. We're seeing now it's moving into a world where online merges with offline, offline merges back into online. You have all these hybrid opportunities. And that's really where you're taking advantage of the best of each of the mediums and saying, what is actually necessary to contribute to a great learning experience, supporting and scaffolding the student learning and their social emotional supports, their student development supports, but at the same time creating access and scale. And then I think another major bucket, around 2016 is when we started investing globally. It's when we made our first investment in Andela. It's when we invested in BYJU'S. This was also when VIP Kid was really taking off. And that really showed the power of global reach and how you could really reach consumers, direct to consumer, and really reach scale. And I think that was an opportunity to say, as Michael mentioned earlier, in the US, people don't recognize that investing in education is actually something that is very impactful. But in some of these markets, people understand that you can lift entire families out of poverty. So that was another arc that was really exciting for us. We really saw the potential for impact at scale. And then I think the last one I'd highlight is just when there was a period of boot camps and you had General Assembly come on the scene. And that's when you started recognizing that there was this process of actually bringing market-relevant skills and job placements as outcomes to learners. And it opened up an entire world of alternative pathways outside of higher ed, alternative credentials, and that's really led to this generation of reskilling and upskilling, which you see in India right now with Emeritus, obviously, which is one of our investments, but then also UpGrad, Simply Learn, and Great Learning. All of them really kind of taking this model of how do you actually bring market-relevant skills and make sure that your outcomes are actually leading to job placements. And you see, in fact, actually some of these financing options around income sharing agreements, which, there's questions as to whether that's been successful or scaled, but it really is aligning the outcome with the business model. And so I think when you look back, I think one of the things that we pay attention to is to what extent, are entrepreneurs actually continuing to iterate? Because when you look at any of these arcs, the first generation wasn't necessarily the best product or the best solution. But what we're excited about with EdTech and entrepreneurs is that we're just continuing to see that evolution and continuing to improve. Our hope is that people continue to do that by looking at the research and the evidence and the outcomes as they're doing their product design. We call it learning engineering, starting with evidence-based research, continuing to iterate and measure the outcomes. And we think that's what's ultimately going to win. It's the solutions that are generating outcomes. And I think the other piece is, as I said earlier, the solutions that are really taking advantage of the medium and what is the benefit of that interactivity, that engagement, that data and the insights into the student progression. Really paying attention not to just the academic piece, but also to the human development, social and emotional learning pieces. Companies that really understand and platforms that really recognize the teacher and supporting the teacher and their adoption of the technology. So those are some of the things that we really continue to see as really driving success.
Thank you for such a detailed and wonderful answer, Vivian. Really appreciate that. Pratik, this is for you, and I'll kind of take a leaf from what Vivian mentioned. So COVID saw, a very significant increase in adoption, right? So, all the edtech models that were vying for attention, suddenly adoption happened. And, 2 years out, you see some winners and some also rans, right? So there is a little bit of a separation of the grain from the chaff, if you will. I would like you to comment on, from your observation, what are the winners looking like, right? What has led to, winners getting created versus the also rans? And specifically, if you can explore, online versus offline competition and how that panned out. And also businesses that focused on, for example, engagement versus outcomes, right? And how has that panned out? So if you could just explore this in a little bit more detail, I think that will be helpful.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with what has been consistent pre-COVID and post-COVID. So we started investing in and building edtech companies because edtech actually leads to accessibility and affordability. And like Michael was mentioning, what is in the water here, the reality is in India, the only way you can come out of middle class and the poverty rug is by studying. And that's the only way to grow out of it. So that's why people study. And that problem statement is still there. The accessibility and affordability solution is still there. The penetration is still low. And so everything is still positive. Now, what happened during COVID, in my opinion, is during 2-3 years, we accelerated the adoption by 7-8 years. What was about to happen in 7-8 years happened in 2 years, nothing else changed. The mistake we did is some changes we thought were permanent were really not permanent. We thought that schools would not exist and everyone will go online. That did not happen. We thought that the emotional and the social part of learning was not as relevant. That did not happen. So in some verticals, like, for example, government test prep or NEET preparation, we were right. The online penetration is better and online works. But in some categories like K-12 or like you mentioned for Akash, like K-12 and for JEE preparation, etc., people realize that offline or hybrid is the answer, and pure online perhaps is not the best answer. So a lot of these learnings happened. People became smarter. We learned from the ecosystem. We failed at a few places. But overall, we are at a better place now than we were 4 years back. And that's a positive thing for all of us. So in my opinion, we are still ahead of the curve. But we did a few mistakes that we need to correct on.
Do you also want to comment, for example, on people again really starting to leverage technology for different purposes? So, for example, Physics Wala is a great example, which redefined what market access can mean, by dramatically changing the price point, right? So, from $1,000 price point, they brought it down to like $50, right? And completely redefined. Now you can't deliver at $50 in an offline world, but you can deliver at $50 in an online world. So, do you also want to explore again, some of the examples where, because you are able to use technology in an interesting way, you are able to democratize education, get it to more people, really change, by an order of magnitude, the price that you have to pay for education. Do you want to explore some of that as well?
Yeah, and I would argue it's not just about price. So price is one lever, the delivery platform is another lever, the engagement platform is another lever. And companies have innovated in all these directions. So could you have the best teacher in the world teach something to everyone without technology? No, which is happening with a lot of players right now. Physics Wala and Adda 24/7, of course, reduced prices of education significantly, which is awesome. Quizizz helps people engage better in classroom, which could not have happened without technology. I'm actually very excited about the fact that people can actually learn from each other, which cannot happen very well in classroom, but potentially technology can help peer-to-peer learning better. I'm excited about the fact that immersive learning could come out, or content-driven learning could come out better. New forms of content could be used to teach better. And a lot of these players are trying. So technology is definitely a great enabler and a great leveler for a lot of these paradigms.
Thank you. Thank you. Karthik, I have reserved the difficult questions for you.
Sure.
Okay. So, we have looked at, what has happened in the last 10 years. We looked at what has COVID done in terms of EdTech adoption. Let's zoom out, what's looking at, next 10 years, what's going to happen. Okay. And I'll start by, talking about what Mark Andreessen mentioned as we have really not changed the education system for the last 300 years. The education system, was designed for a particular purpose. Universities were designed for a particular purpose. Schools were designed for a particular. So the whole timetable in a K-12 school was designed for a particular purpose. It was for, creating enough clerks that can operate British, government machinery, right? Like, that was the reason why you had, timetable in, K-12 schools. So if you had an opportunity to really kind of radically transform education using technology, and kind of stargaze on what's possible over the next 10 years. Would you like to comment on what's possible and how will, let's say, K-12 education change, over the next 10 years? And again, how should, continuous learning or higher education change over the next 10 years? I would also request you to explore, and, in education, there is this constant debate on credentialing versus capability, right? Where more and more there are situations where, there are young people, who have the capability, but may or may not think much about the credentials that are needed, in today's organization. So help us explore what tomorrow, 10 years out, could look like, both for K-12 plus the university stroke higher ed.
No, I think it's a super challenging problem to solve, just not a question to answer, as you said, because it's difficult to sort of disrupt the continuous stream of education that everybody's on. So you suddenly can't take my 9th grader at home and say, switch education streams or start, getting educated differently than, or for that matter, somebody who's entering 3rd grade at this point. So I think the challenge, by the way, in my opinion, is when you look at K-12, I don't think it's as much about the overemphasis on education as much as other localized problems. So it's about, as Sajid, in fact, in my team says, it's about daycare, it's about teaching socializing skills, and you want them close to, you geographically, because there's just the challenge of having, a kid do long distance commutes, etc. So essentially, all of those lead to having to fix local schooling systems and not simply wish for something magical from outside. So you have to be able to fix every local district, every local school with innovation in the way that kid gets educated, right? And Vivian spoke a little bit about it. We are enabling teacher tools and we are enabling teacher training, but it's not enough to be able to cover the expanse of this country. And every year, at least this thought comes once to my mind that another year has passed and we haven't done anything to fix it, right? And that means another generation of students have lost the ability to learn fundamentals of math or physics or chemistry or English at a particular age group. And this is dramatic because you can never learn it back the same way as you would have learned it in 5th grade or 7th grade or 9th grade. And you suddenly can't say that after you're 23, just go back and learn it. It doesn't happen. And to me, this is tragic. It's 10 years is too long, I feel, at one level. It's not that we are fixing it as we speak, but I feel like you almost have to have a governmental push. And the point that you made around at what cost point do you have to deliver, that is very critical, right? So how do you actually democratize, tools, whether they have ability to be taught as a hybrid of online, offline, right? We see this in later higher ed, but we don't see it in K-12 enough. How do you actually enable sort of, can you actually give VR, AR tools to the poorest schools? It's very, very challenging. It's very tough. But I do think there is a huge opportunity for someone who can crack this, right? I don't think anyone has done it in any part of the world effectively, where you're essentially enabling a 3rd grader in Mumbai or Delhi to get, be no different than a 3rd grader in a small district school. And the minute you've created that difference in quality of that education, I think it's very difficult for that kid to catch up. And yes, you hear of miracle stories coming from one small town or one small village, but you're essentially asking for them to, swim against the tide 10 times harder and then emerge victorious in that education battle. You've actually not leveled the playing field at all. So this is my K-12 dilemma. I haven't seen, I'm looking for answers myself.
So, Karthik, if you look at what tech promised, right, one was consistency of learning no matter where you are, right? Like you can be in a Mumbai or you could be in a Jabalpur. In theory, you should be able to get access to same quality, of teacher, right? Because, you can do a remote learning, etc. The second thing, in some way that, technology has promised is personalization at scale. So I should have data available for my performance and I should get a personalized feedback so that I can improve, right? If you look at both of these, right, by and large for K-12, students going, in schools, this remains an unsolved problem, right? You still, if you look at typical report cards, they are by and large, again, fairly generic. They are not personalized, let's say, to an individual. And not just school, right? Even kind of in a tutoring environment. Similarly, you mentioned sort of, teacher consistency in terms of, quality of teacher available in place X versus place Y. So who do you think, what do you think could be a great solution for something like this?
It's a tough one, as I said. I'm not a miracle worker in terms of imagining this, but like Michael touched upon a lot of ideas, right? So whether we use a combination of ChatGPT-enabled tools to be able to assist teachers better, to be able to customize, but it's not a problem you can outsource entirely to the cloud or somebody distant or remote. And you have to have foundational learning up to like say 5th, 6th grade be world-class for everybody. You can't say that, AI-enabled tool will come and magically solve a 9th grader's problem if their education has been crappy till 6th grade. And that is the biggest challenge. So I think you need to solve from pretty much kindergarten onwards. If you solve it till 7th, 8th, then I think your problem becomes easier. A lot of other tools can come and help children self-learn from the 8th grade, but assuming that everyone has had the same foundational education from kindergarten to 8th. That to me is the bigger challenge, right? And we don't have anything that fixes that today, in my opinion, at scale. To your second part of the question, I think once the child is in 10th, 12th grade, I think the orientation, especially in an economy like India, becomes around matching skills to what jobs are available, right? Matching interests and skills and capabilities to what jobs are available. Of course, if they've already lost on education, that choice set reduces. But if they're actually equipped to be at a baseline education, I think the entire orientation and the effort of the economy should be to drive towards the best paying jobs in some sense. And that is probably far easier to do today than ever before, because the person is self-motivated or has enough tools to be able to become a medical professional or an assisted healthcare professional or a doctor or an engineer or a machine worker. And that, I think, is an incredible ability to do hybrid education, to do, where they're actually able to train on the job, learn remotely, do virtual jobs sitting anywhere in the world, which is why I think we should become the coding capital of the world naturally. All of these possibilities kick in, and then for each vertical, I think there are many unicorn ideas, if you ask me. Because I think the attention generally shifts from foundational learning to just job-based, goal-oriented learning. And those are much easier to drive once the kid is at an age where geography doesn't become a boundary and social skills are not at school anymore, but they're in society as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Mansi, my next question, building on what Karthik mentioned. So if you will look at sort of really kids who are sub 10 years of age, where let's say most of the foundational learning is happening, and sort of we are talking of tools like ChatGPT, AI, metaverse. So there is a lot of talk of these newer tools that are going to emerge that could potentially accelerate learning in the classroom, right? What do you think, is the near-term potential? What are some of the case studies, if you have come across? What, if you have to stargaze and look at, how transformational some of these tools can be for early years learning. Let's say, from when the child is, let's say, 3 years of age till the child is 10 years of age. What do you think is the transforming potential for some of these technologies? And again, use in classroom, aiding teachers, etc. So just explore that with us.
Sure. I think the most transformative and exciting thing for me is if the learning outcome itself can broaden. So sometimes I feel like what we were tested on was a function of, what was possible to test, and hence the learning outcomes were restrained by that. So I like many folks here probably studied in ICSE. Lot of the focus was on, hey, data and information, can you absorb and then kind of extract and replicate that, right, in your exam? And today, I think the generation that is sub 10 years old, hopefully they're in a world where that data, information access is table stakes. Everyone has access to it. So the skills and the learning outcomes that really they need to develop, as well as that maybe today can be enabled a lot earlier, are broader. So what I mean is some of the C's that Michael kind of touched upon, let's say creativity, critical thinking, collaboration and teamwork. These were not things we focused on because I think maybe, we've thought foundationally we need to get the other things right first, plus they were hard to measure. If I think about, this is a different kind of world, but I'll draw it as an analogy. One of my professors at Wharton, Ethan Mollick, uses a lot of AI in his classroom. So he has an AI charter that says that why don't you, the biggest skill in the next 10 years is going to be how to use AI or ChatGPT or whatever the newest version is the most effectively. So why don't I teach you how to do that as a skill? So one interesting example, we've all written essays in college, in school. Instead, what he says is, look, use ChatGPT to write your essay, but tell me the first version that it spits out, and then give it the right prompts and teach, assume ChatGPT was your student and teach it to do better. So, it's a very, and you kind of share the before and after, and I think that's a very interesting higher order output that comes out at the end, and there are higher order skills that you develop as you were doing that. So even kind of translating it back into a younger classroom, I think today we can push students to not just kind of learn, remember, but broaden those learning outcomes. And also do it maybe in a more fun way, right? I think the memories of school, it was always like, hey, we study and then we like have fun. And today when I talk to younger cousins, who are kind of grew up in the world of Roblox, for example, they are learning a lot of the skills that I mentioned. Roblox, Minecraft, all of these are teaching social, team building skills, problem solving skills. But it is this like invisible learning concept that I think Michael put nicely. So Michael, thank you for putting all the concepts so we makes our answers easier. But I think it's a nice blend of all of those things that should transform the way the first kind of 10 years and even ahead of education look like.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt. Mansi, thanks for reminding me about it's been a while since someone reminded me about my ICSE education and even said ICSE to me and sort of described its failings in some ways.
Hey, Rishab, so the next one is for you. So we have spoken about, where we have traveled, the distance that we need to travel, but there's a more here and now, problem that founders in this room have, right? Which is, we are in so-called funding winter. Capital is hard to come by. Questions are being asked about how effective is this, how transformative is this, etc. So, help our audience understand here. What are you seeing in the deal environment? What has changed versus last 12 months, 18 months? What to expect, how should one, think about the narrative today versus narrative 2 years back. Help us just understand what's happening in the world of deal making and how do you kind of therefore adapt to that. That's the learning that entrepreneurs need to have if they need to keep, staying competitive.
Sure. I think to begin with, I'd say that, the title of our panel, Investing in India in the Next Century, it's sort of difficult to think about it in that context, which is that, a century is a long period of time. Venture capital hasn't been around for 100 years. Neither has the joint stock company, really. So to think about that time horizon, I think we really have to think about what Michael was talking about earlier, just fundamentally in terms of the purpose of EdTech at some level for all of us, and then the challenge for all of us is going to be thinking about how that sort of young population that we're trying to educate and skill is going to be absorbed into the global economy and how that's going to work. So that's just a fundamental thing that's going to be a challenge. And the reason I bring it up as a high-level theme is because that's sort of, it's the theme that I think we all need to keep in mind when we're starting companies and we're investing in companies and we're sort of looking at companies. But more specifically, Nitin, to your question, so about the deal environment today, I'd say the way I would answer that question is, so Cooley, we're one of the most active law firms in venture financings. And so we have a quarterly report about the number of venture financings, the median valuations, and the sort of what's going on. And I'd say, to summarize what I think is going on for sort of Q4 2022 as the latest quarter, would be later stage companies the late stage financings are down. And maybe this is something that everyone knows, but it's also just relevant to say that it's supported by the data, which is the late Series C and Series D financings are severely down, whereas the seed stages and early stage financings are also down, but only mildly so. And what does that mean for sort of people in this room and what we need to be thinking going forward? I think what that really translates into is that we're sort of, to use a cricketing analogy, we're out of that sort of power play phase of the innings, right? We're done with investors investing in companies to occupy the market. We're now focusing, I'd say, on investors looking to, investors, I guess, are looking at companies that are actually very, very sure about their place in the market, what problem they're solving, how they're going to solve it, and in sort of what time horizon. And I think there's a lot more scrutiny on that. And the reason for that is, look, it's a much more mature ecosystem. There are large companies that have already occupied the sort of the big obvious challenges, right? Now we're going to solve the next generation of challenges, and we're going to solve the next generation of problems. So that's one sort of overall theme. The second thing I would say is that with the ecosystem maturing, terms, deal terms. The startup ecosystem in India has also matured. So that's a really positive thing. I think people are seeing consistency. People are seeing, investors are now sort of expecting certain kinds of term sheets, all of that stuff, which is all good. That's a second theme. And the last thing I would sort of say is that investors are really focused, right? We're at that stage of the ecosystem, and I'm kind of comparing it to, Silicon Valley in some ways. We're at that stage of the ecosystem where we've now had, in India, some sort of prominent issues with corporate governance and with founders sort of having trouble with that, and companies having trouble with that, and investors having trouble with that. So the thing that I would sort of leave the room with is to say that that is a theme that is now finding itself in conversations, that we're focused, investors are much more focused on corporate governance, setting up good practices for the future. And the pro tip here is that the founders that really resonate with investors, I think, are the ones that recognize it themselves, who welcome that governance and who support that kind of structure. So that's a really important thing for the future.
Thank you, Rishab. That was a comprehensive answer. Thank you. Any last comments before we wrap up the panel, please? Thank you. Thank you for this.
Thanks so much, panelists. Mention of the ICSC and the CBSE boards definitely brought back memories.